All right, it's 11:30 and we do have quite a bit of stuff to get through. So I think we're just going to start and hopefully people can hop on as they can. Hi, my name is Rhonda Craig. I'm an occupational therapist with the Toronto District School Board, and I'm here with my colleague, Anna Talag.
Hi.
Who is also an occupational therapist. And we are really pleased to be here and honored to be here with you today to talk about keeping calm and carrying on, practical strategies to support regulation and relationships. So just a couple of housekeeping items. If you could all please remain muted, it would really help us out. I know that the Parents as Partners is recording the presentation, but we would appreciate if you did not, as this is the property of the Toronto District School Board. So it belongs to the board, this information and this presentation, and should not be published, shared, copied, or reproduced. If you do have any questions, we are hoping to address those at the end because this presentation kind of builds on itself. And so we're hoping that throughout the presentation, some of your questions might be answered, but realizing that they all will not be. But Anna and I will stay on as long as needed at the end to try and answer your questions. And with that, we'll get started with a land acknowledgement.
Out of our deep respect for Indigenous peoples in Canada, we would like to acknowledge that Toronto District School Board properties are situated upon traditional territories. The territories include the Wendat, the Anishinaabeg Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nations, the Mississaugas of Scugog, Hiawatha, Alderville First Nation, and the Métis Nation. We also recognize the enduring presence of Aboriginal peoples on this land.
So just to review our goals for this presentation, one is to just increase our understanding of regulation and co-regulation of ourselves and our children. And the next is to review practical strategies to support regulation at home and in our communities. So our goal really is to hopefully, I think what we're doing right now is probably preaching to the choir and have a group of people who probably understand this at a very core level already. But we're hoping that you find some encouragement from this. Maybe you find one or two new things that you didn't know before, or even a strategy. But the goal, there is no judgment here. There is this theory that we're presenting is really one of community and of finding regulation together. So we're hoping that we can do that today, even through our presentation. Can everybody hear me? I know the videos are off and we are all okay with that, but if someone could give us a thumbs up to say that you can hear us, that the tech is going okay, we'd really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right, so we're just going to start off with, during this crazy season of our lives that has been these last 2 years, what has regulated you? I know for me, during this season, it has been exercise. I will say, honestly, I was not a person who really exercised before the pandemic. And then during the first lockdown, found something that worked for me. And now it just has become something that I go to and that really supports my mental health and my mood. Also, and I will tell you, a cup of tea is my thing. And I have even a coaster that says, where there is tea, there is hope. And I totally agree with that. Anna, do you have any examples?
Well, I think definitely going for a car ride and getting a coffee by myself in the car became a go-to when I was getting overwhelmed and in the car, I would listen to podcasts that were different. So normally I listened to kind of crime mystery podcasts, but I started listening to The Life of Dolly Parton and I loved it. And it was just so different from the usual things that I listen or watch. And it was nice because it kept me regulated and it was just a different topic. And I was alone in the car with a coffee. Like that has become one of my go-tos for my regulation.
What you should know is Anna is the parent of three toddler boys or young boys. So that time in the car alone is precious. If you guys want to participate and throw something in the chat as to what has regulated you, please feel free to do so. And we're just going to keep moving on as well. And if you see anything, let me know. Oh, there we go. Okay, so we're just going to do a quick, this video is a really great example of the theory that we're presenting, which is called the polyvagal theory today, which some of you may have heard of. It's just a really simple explanation of it, and then we're going to go into it a little bit. So let's go here.
Over half of us have a chronic disorder such as high blood pressure or autoimmune disease. Rates of anxiety, depression, PTSD, and addiction are skyrocketing. Why? The roots of these issues and more can often be traced to trauma, adverse childhood experiences, chronic stress, and ultimately, nervous system dysregulation. Meet your autonomic nervous system. Let's call it ANS. ANS takes care of a lot of your automatic functions, like your heartbeat, digestion, and body temperature. ANS also manages your survival and stress response, working to keep you alive when your life is in danger. ANS functions as our built-in detection system, constantly scanning our environment for cues of safety and cues of danger. As ANS scans the environment, it has 3 general responses or states. Safe. You feel calm, relaxed, and connected to those around you. Mobilized. When ANS detects danger, it sends a command and your heart rate and breathing increase, adrenaline and cortisol are released, and blood rushes to your muscles so you can handle the threat. This is our fight-flight response. Immobilized. When ANS detects that the danger is so great that you can't fight or run, it shuts you down. In this state, our heart rate, blood pressure, and body temperature decrease, and pain-numbing endorphins are released. ANS does all of this automatically without us thinking about it. ANS doesn't just use these states for survival. It uses them to navigate through the world each day. When ANS functions well, it moves fluidly from one state to another, 1 minute mobilized and ready for action, and the next resting and recovering. ANS will often blend states together. When we play, ANS combines the mobilized and safe states. And when we are intimate with loved ones, it combines immobilized and safe states. When ANS can stay flexible and fluid like this, it helps us manage and become resilient to stress and negative events. We're able to bounce back and move on. Unfortunately, when we experience trauma and chronic stress, it can keep ANS from functioning in a healthy, regulated, and resilient way, and can keep us stuck in states of survival. A friendly get-together can become frightening. A simple meeting at work can become threatening. For those with a history of trauma and chronic stress, the ANS...
All right, so we'll stop right there. Oops, sorry. I always do that, and then it takes me to the wrong spot. There we go.
You got it.
Okay. So that was just a quick explanation. This is, like I said, we're kind of basing all of this on the polyvagal theory. That's a big word, but it's a theory that was created by Dr. Stephen Porges. And it's really a really beautiful explanation of how our bodies develop, our nervous systems work with and develop regulation. You heard the word resilience, and how even neurodiverse populations, how we can see the differences in their neurology based on this and on this theory. So this is another just kind of nice visual of the polyvagal theory. It was created by Dr. Deb Dana, who is a counselor, a psychologist, and she works closely with Dr. Porges. So at the top of the ladder is that safe and social. And so when they were talking about the ANS and how our nervous system reacts, this is the part of the ladder or the nervous system. When we are feeling safe, when we are feeling connected, we are open to the world. We are open for learning. We are open for friendship, for reciprocal interactions. It's when we are in a place where we are feeling good, and in our bodies, our heart rates are normal, our breathing is normal, and you can see that the face is involved in emotion. So if you're smiling, the eyes have little crinkles in the sides of them, those little crow's feet, you know that your body is in a safe and social state and is open for receiving and for learning. If we drop a little bit further down the ladder, that's called the sympathetic activation, or that mobilized state they were talking about in the video. This is what we know as the flight-fight response. And excuse me, in this state, the body does different things. The blood shunts to or moves to your extremities to get you ready to run or to move. Your vision changes, and so it goes from central vision into peripheral vision because you're looking for danger. Your heart rate becomes faster, your breathing becomes more shallow, your senses become more alert to what's happening around you, and your body is really in a state of mobilization or movement. It's ready to move because it's trying to quote unquote flee a predator. And so in this state, we as OTs will probably when you hear about sensory strategies, this is where we might use a lot of our strategies or some of our strategies to help people use those bodily states to try and bring them a little bit further up the ladder back into safe and social. In this state, you will also see that if people are smiling, the face is not actually involved. The eyes look like deer in the headlights. And for some of our neurodiverse population, their neurology is created or laid down in such a way where it kind of predisposes them to living a little bit further down the ladder and living in this area. And that can be due to a lot of things. It can be due to early childhood experiences. It can be due to, for some of us, for adults, it can be due to trauma, which pushes us a little bit further down the ladder. For people with differing diagnoses, such as ASD, ADHD, Down syndrome, the neurology is different for it all. And so some of us are just a little bit more predisposed to living in a little bit further down the ladder. And so we do try and use some of those strategies to help move us up a little bit more. And then at the bottom of the ladder, you see that kind of numb, collapsed, shutdown stage. This is this part of the ladder where you really are in shutdown. Your body is kind of disassociating or moving out of itself, because evolutionarily, this was the moment where if a predator was coming and the prey knew that it couldn't get away, it was the body's response to protect you from feeling the pain of death. It was also, when those animals play dead, a way of tricking predators. And so the heart rate goes really shallow, the breathing goes really slow, and you just kind of start to leave your body. For us, as humans, or when we might reach a state of disassociation or of shutdown, it can look very different for different people. Some people might just fall asleep or lose consciousness. Some people just withdraw within themselves. In this state, the best strategy that can occur is if there is a safe person, a person who is known to be safe to that individual, to come and to just be with them, to create safe space for them, to sometimes a little light touch, reassuring words, very, very gentle and short reassuring words, fleeting eye contact can really help bring a person back into themselves and help move them up the ladder. And just be aware that when we are moving up the ladder, we do move through each of the states. So you don't necessarily go from shutdown straight up into safe and social. You do have to move through mobilize. It can be very quickly, and then coming up into safe and social. And so I know that's a really quick explanation, but it's just the idea that we can have different states and we can use different strategies in those states to help us move up the ladder. But the most important thing is that this is a theory of connectedness. And so it really requires the attunement and understanding of other people to help us understand how regulation can occur and how it can be affected. And we're going to go into that a little bit further. Another thing to note just quickly is that you can be in melded states, which is what the the video was also saying. So you can be in play, which is actually a mobilized state, but because you're still feeling safe and social, it's a safe thing and it's play. And I always kind of use that example of those little kids who are in play and everything's going well and all of a sudden it becomes a fight. That's when your nervous system, your brain kind of, the vagal brake is what they call it, shuts down or isn't as strong as it would be if they were a little bit older. And then all of a sudden their body forgets that they're in a safe state and moves into that fight flight without them even realizing it, because their heart rates are up, their breathing is fast. And so their body's like, oh, we're in a state of mobilization because that safe social turned off. I hope that makes a little bit of sense. And we'll flesh it out a little bit more as we go along. But if you have questions, please do ask us at the end.
So like the trauma video described, and what Rhonda was also talking about, neuroception is when our 8 senses provide perception of threat or safety. So neuroception takes place in the earliest parts of our brain. Those are the primitive parts of our brain, and we have no control over it because it's in our conscious awareness. And it's the first step we do that our brains.
One second, Anna. I didn't define neuroception. So can you define it for them?
Oh, sorry. So neuroception is really what happens when we assess our environment around us, whether it's safety or a threat. So it's basically when we enter any new situation, our brains go and try to detect if something's wrong. So let's say you cross the street, the first thing you're going to do is look around and all of your senses are working at the same time to check that there's no cars coming. And that's really what neuroception is. It's very jargony, but it's really basic. And we do it all the time. But as OTs, we like to look at neuroception using our senses. And we spend a lot of time investigating and trying to understand how our senses affect how we feel and how we interact with the world. So you guys must know your 5 senses because they're very common and everyone knows the language around the 5 senses. So you have your hearing, your eyesight, your smell, your taste, and your touch. If you're in a situation where you're a little bit anxious, your hearing might be more tuned, so it might be higher, it might be more registered because you're listening more. If you're anxious, your eyesight can be maybe a little bit more blurry, not as clear. Your smell is heightened, and so is your taste. And I think the research actually shows that when you're anxious and you eat different types of food, no matter what the food is, it actually tastes more bitter or metally based on your emotion of anxiousness. So that was really interesting. There's 3 senses though that we occupational therapists love to spend a little bit more time on because they're very important senses that we don't really know much about, or we don't talk about. We know a lot about them, but we just don't talk about them as much. Interoception is one of those senses. So basically that's your internal organs and your internal states. So that's like your bodily functions like hunger, and also going to the bathroom. So going number 1 or number 2. So that's interoception. You can imagine when you're anxious. I know when I'm anxious, I go to the bathroom a lot, or if I'm upset, I'm not very hungry. So there's different states that will change your interoceptive and your internal organ states. The vestibular system is a system about movement, and it's basically your sense of movement in space in terms of speed and direction and how you move about in your body. So if you see some students or some of our kids, I know my toddlers, when they're nervous, I can tell because they spin a little bit more and they get really silly, or they go upside down. And that's basically happening because your vestibular sense happens in your inner ear. The last sense that we love to talk about is called proprioception. And that sense is the sense of belonging, and that's your body awareness. So knowing where your body is in space. And so for some kids, when they're feeling anxious or scared, sometimes you can see them push themselves in the crevice of the couch, or push your body up against the wall. I find when we're in too big of a space, my kids who are toddlers will touch the walls just to make sure that that's how far the wall is from me. And this is where my body is in space, because it's a really big gym that I'm in and it's a little scary. But you can see how the different senses play such a huge role in kind of helping us understand how a child may be feeling. And like Rhonda spoke about, our nervous system really goes into 3 states: fight, flight, or freeze. And it's important to understand that some of our kids, or even ourselves, were predisposed to those sense activations. But really the importance of this slide and learning about your senses, it's just learning to be more attuned to your own senses, even if it's your heart rate or what happens when you're upset, and knowing what happens in your body, because that's really going to help with, I find when I'm more attuned with my body, I'm able to be more attuned to understanding what my child's sensory needs are. And I'm able to empathize a lot more to understand them that, oh, wow, it is a really big deal when you're upset because you can't even tell me that you are hungry, but you're really hungry. And we'll delve a little bit more into that in the practical strategies, but that's the 8 senses. And we love exploring the 8 senses because they tell us so much about how we feel inside our bodies and how we see the world. So this next video can be a little upsetting, and just as a little disclaimer that it will show a baby in distress, but it's just, we want you to pay attention to how mom is responding to the baby, her nonverbal cues, with her facial expression, and really how attuned she is to her baby. We'll explain that a little bit more.
Babies this young are extremely responsive to the emotions and the reactivity and the social interaction that they get from the world around them. This is something that we started studying 30, 40 years ago, when people didn't think that infants could engage in social interaction. In the still face experiment, what the mother did was she sits down and she's playing with her baby, who's about a year of age.
I'm like a girl. Oh.
And she gives a greeting to the baby gives a greeting back to her.
Yeah.
This baby starts pointing at different places in the world, and the mother's trying to engage her and play with her. They're working to coordinate their emotions and their intentions, what they want to do in the world. And that's really what the baby is used to. And then we ask the mother to not respond to the baby. The baby very quickly picks up on this, and then she uses all of her abilities to try and get the mother back. She smiles at the mother. She points because she's used to the mother looking where she points. The baby puts both hands up in front of her and says, "What's happening here?" She makes that screechy sound at the mother, like, come on, why aren't we doing this? Even in this 2 minutes, when they don't get the normal reaction, they react with negative emotions, they turn away, they feel the stress of it, they actually may lose control of their posture because of the stress that they're experiencing.
So really at the beginning of that video, you saw some really beautiful co-regulation. And that is a term that we like to use a lot because it's really the foundation of self-regulation skills. I know a couple years back, there was a huge boom in presentations and kind of new language around self-regulation and how our students really need to learn how to self-regulate. But now that we have a lot of research, we're knowing that self-regulation and co-regulation go hand in hand. And we don't stop co-regulating with anybody throughout our lifespan. We need co-regulation to actually get us there, to have skills to be self-regulating at times. But we need both. But co-regulation is essential to have those self-regulation skills develop well. And it's what we were created to do. So in infancy, you can see there, when a baby is crying, we regulate the baby by giving them our time. I know that we give them a bottle, or we even just have to hold them for hours just so they feel safe and secure. But how an adult reacts to a stressful situation will really impact how the child's regulation is going to grow in the moment, because they're modeling that behavior and they're seeing, how does that trusted adult deal with that stressful emotion? That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to try that next time some form of stress happens in my life. And we know that it's lifelong. And we know that the research is actually showing that children will need co-regulation. And I couldn't believe this when I read it all, was toddlerhood, puberty, and early adult onset. And I had to read the age in early adults onset, and it was from 25 to 33. And it was unbelievable. And it's because during these 3 wonderful and important phases in our life, there's huge brain development happening, and there's reorganizing in the brain happening, and there's maturation happening. So what's happening is there's so much change happening in my brain that I need to have my trusted adult there to help me feel safe. And that's why I find with my toddlers, when they have a huge tantrum, like at the end of it, they're kind of like opening their arms up, and they just kind of need that hug. And they were having a meltdown over, their sock was green and they wanted a red sock. Like it was just something irrational. But those irrational phases in our lives actually don't stop till we're around 33. And that's important to take into consideration, because brain organization is happening there, and brain maturation. So those are really beautiful moments in our lives, but they're very hard too for our co-regulators. Rhonda, did you want to add anything to that?
I think that was actually a beautiful explanation of it, but just also that co-regulation really is a lifelong thing, and that we have co-regulators. I have my co-regulators now. Like Anna is one of them. I just text her all the time, actually. My husband, my child, both of whom can drive me absolutely bonkers, and who I co-regulate, but also co-regulate. Mm-hmm. And so while there are moments in our lives, as Anna said, that require more probably patience and co-regulation, mm-hmm. It is something that we all do to each other. And so what we bring to the table will affect how the situation is going. And really, it's not to say that I always have to bring happiness and joy to the table. It's just the recognition that what I bring today is going to make a difference. And sometimes what I'm going to bring is grump and grumpy. And I've realized that when I can acknowledge that for myself and verbalize it for my child, my 5-year-old little girl, things go a little bit better, because she actually they're amazing little beings, and they help figure the situation out. But this visual is really beautiful in that it says, when their storm meets our calm, co-regulation occurs. And so when our child's storm meets our calm, co-regulation occurs. But also when my husband's storm or my storm meets his calm, co-regulation occurs. It's not just an adult-child thing, it's an adult-to-adult thing.
It's true. One of the components of good co-regulation, and you can't really do co-regulation without it, is attunement. And attunement is basically when we allow our internal states and we adjust our behavior to upregulate or downregulate the other person that needs our regulation. So that's an example of that is really easy. Like when I'm already upset and my toddler's upset, and I get more upset at him, and I say, like, what do you want? Like, what do you really want from me? He gets more upset, and I'm not really calming his sensory needs or his sensory regulation down. But when I use less language and I kind of just sit there with him and I open my arms up, and I find the meltdown shorter, and then he just kind of comes to me and goes, I wanted a yogurt, but I couldn't tell you. So I decided to throw the chair at you. So yeah.
And so for some of our kids who are nonverbal, that also can look like, oh, I see that you're headbanging. Okay, you're probably really upset. And so it's being detectives of how the body is reacting. And so that's why we kind of are giving you a lot of these bodily reactions, because sometimes not toddlers who have oral language and those who don't can communicate to us through their bodies what is happening. And that attunement term, we have to tune in and say, okay, what's happening here, and how can I bring my calm?
Mm-hmm. And I think attunement is really just saying or feeling and showing, I see you. I see that you're in distress. I see you. I'm here. It doesn't mean I'm going to fix your problem. It just means I'm here, because some problems don't go away. Sometimes it's blood work and we got to get the needle done, or sometimes a vaccine or something, right? So, but I'm here for you is what attunement is.
Actually, that reminds me. So it's just going back to that ladder that we were talking about. That I am here and I see you piece is actually that piece that helps us come up the ladder and live higher up the ladder. So an example that I really love is Dr. Peter Levine, who is like the father of just kind of body and trauma and helping us live a little bit higher up the ladder. He's in his 70s and he recently actually got hit by a car while he was walking. And so a nurse actually happens to be walking by and she said, "What can I do to help?" And he said, "Just put your hand on my shoulder." And the reason he told her to do that was because he knew that that kind of touch would help him stay in his body and would reduce the effect of the trauma of being hit by the car. And so just that idea that having a person beside him who could co-regulate him or just be there to keep him in himself helped him live a little bit further up the ladder. And that's what we're talking about when we're talking about all of this, just going back to that ladder, that idea of how can I bring my calm to help you, your system, your body, your regulation come higher up so you're living in that safe and social.
That's right.
So what do you do to take care of you? And in this season, the answer could be very little because there just isn't that much time. But we're hoping that even just as we hear about how important it is and how we affect each other so much, that just the understanding that if I can take care of me a little bit, I can take care of those around me better. And so we just a moment of reflection to say, if there's nothing at this moment that you can think of, we hope and encourage that if you can, if it's even just a minute of taking a deep breath, having that moment in the car for a cup of coffee, if there's a possibility of doing that, it allows, if you can go for a walk with a friend and have that co-regulator, that safe person just hear you, whatever that can be. We hope that it's already in place, and if it isn't, that it can be found.
Kind of like what they say when you get on the plane, right? You got to put on your oxygen mask first before you put someone else's on.
Exactly. Well done. So we're just going to now move into the strategies that hopefully incorporate some of that idea of trying to live at the top of that ladder in that safe and social.
So we already kind of reiterated that relationship part and really just modeling that response to stress and managing your calm as much as you can. And it doesn't mean you're going to do it every time. I really, as a mom, it's impossible for me to do it every time. I have a 5, a 3, and a 1-year-old. I'm losing my cool all the time. But I do take those moments where I'm like, okay, I'm calm today. I'm going to show them how I'm going to make dinner. And I say, I'm really, really upset right now, but I'm going to take some deep breaths. And they watch me take some deep breaths. Or I say, I'm going to go upstairs and I'll come back down. But watch me go upstairs and come back down. And that helps them see that mommy has to take a break and take a strategy. And then I'll come back and we will deal with the crises. Meaningful play. So we know that joyful interaction is really important, but making time for that. And I find personally, I just have to remind myself like, okay, I'm going to play, I'm going to sit here and give my undivided attention. And just speaking for myself, I put my phone away just because my 5-year-old actually requests it. He says, can you not put this on Instagram, or can you not take a picture of it? Can you just sit here without anybody calling? And I realized that was important to him. So I listened and I just did it in the moment. And I think it's hard to be present, and it takes a lot of effort. But I'm challenging myself to do that a lot more. And then the last bit is really just staying physically near them for that support. It doesn't mean that we need to be hugging them. Using less language is really important. So if they're upset and in the middle of breaking down, just staying near them, maybe opening up your arms and using much less language, because that part of the brain is really turning off when those meltdowns happen. And we love this quote. It's so beautiful because it's really talks about what the heart of resilience is. When we shift our perspective from my child is behaving badly to my child is struggling with something that is difficult, we support resilience.
And just so if you guys can't see at the bottom, that's by Dr. Mona Delahouque, who is also just she also has worked closely with Dr. Porges and bases her practice on polyvagal. So just other strategies, the environment. These are simple things that we can do in our environments to just help all of us live a little bit higher up the ladder. So natural lighting is very regulating to everybody's system. So Anna and I work in classrooms and we try to bring these strategies into the classrooms as well. And so a lot of the times if there are windows in a classroom, we'll ask for the overhead lights to be turned off because it does just really help regulate everybody's nervous system. Calming scents, lavender, vanilla. I know we have scent issues, but just generally, lavender and vanilla are considered calming to everybody's senses. I actually did have one teacher. She had a classroom of very highly anxious JK and SK students, and they were coming off their buses in such a tizzy, and it was really hard to find regulation in the morning in her classroom. So she got permission from all the parents, and then she put a diffuser on in her classroom of a vanilla scent. She put some nature scenes on the whiteboard, and she put some calming music in the background, and it just changed the morning. The kids just walked into natural lighting and a space where they could just be with all of these environmental supports in place, and the regulation came back. Instead of it coming back an hour and a half after they entered the classroom, it came back 15 minutes after.
Oh, that's so nice.
Classroom. So yeah, nature scenes. The research shows about 5 minutes of watching a nature scene, even on a whiteboard, they were doing it with high school students before they went into an exam, can help maintain your bodily regulation for like an hour or an hour and a half. So there is something beautiful about nature, and it just is a part of regulation for us. And then calming music, classical music, because of the rhythm of it, is often considered calming. A very consistent drum beat is found to be very regulating to systems. Actually, Dr. Porges is doing some really interesting research on sound. He's created something called the Safe and Sound Protocol, but one of the things he always says is that our nervous system is attuned to the female voice, the mom voice, and finds that calming, but finds deeper voices a little bit more threatening. Not to say that that's across the board or that dads don't have a huge and beautiful role to play. It's to say that, even our tone of voice can sometimes just be the trigger. And so just being aware of what we bring to the table can make it.
I think that sound of a female and also the drumming is probably related to in infancy, we're growing inside our mother, and we only hear her voice that's very calm, and we only hear a heartbeat, and the heartbeat is what we hear that's a constant as we're being created. So it's such a powerful thing. I think that's why drums make such a big difference for some students.
Routine structures and visuals. We always go back to what we know, especially when we're under a lot of stress. And so there is something to be said for just the consistency of routines. And so developing routines and structure can help us live a little bit higher up the ladder because it removes the unpredictability of expectation. I know what is expected of me. I know what I'm supposed to do. I know what the next step is. And so it can be a very strong way to remove a lot of anxiety, especially for students or children or adults even, who we are not sure if the way we're communicating is working. I had this actually a lot just yesterday with my 5-year-old. I was just not understanding what she was trying to communicate to me, and she lost her mind, and fair enough. But there is something powerful in that use of visuals. So just using something tangible to show what you mean, right? And so when my 5-year-old can't communicate what she wants, she points, and that's super helpful. And I use the example of holding up keys as a means of saying we're going in 15 minutes, as opposed to just a picture like I know we're using what are called picture exchange kind of visuals here, but real visuals, real tangible items can be very, very powerful. Yeah. And just again, that idea that if I have a structure and a routine in place, it kind of reduces that unpredictability and helps my body live in a safer place.
We like to really use this in practice within the school systems. It's really nice to use a strength-based approach to making sure that we're including all of their interests in terms of task demands. So task demands is anything that you're requiring of your child to do that's not really favorable to them. So when we talk about the strength-based approach, it's not really using that first then that we're so used to hearing everywhere. And it's actually being used in Montessori now too. But I find first then it's difficult because first you have to do the task, then you get your reward. But if your interest is part of who you are, and it's not just an interest that goes away, it's a hobby and it's integral to you, you're going to want to do that demand more if it's part of the actual demand. So this visual is a really nice explanation of that, because it says first copy the sentence, then you can play with Lego. But the next one says, hey, let's make a list of what Legos we want to build so we can make a Minecraft creeper. And that's using two of their hobbies, which is Lego and Minecraft. And we're really challenging our educators and at TDSB to do that as well, to make sure that we are incorporating hobbies, because it's not just special interests, especially for our special needs population. Those special interests are not special interests. Those are hobbies that are part of who they are, and it's very, very important to them. And we have so much more buy-in, and we have less issues when it comes to kids saying no, because it's just a part of who they are, and they enjoy the work, and it doesn't even feel like work because it's incorporating the things that they love.
And just to note that the things that they love may look super odd to us. So an example I have from this week actually is I have a little girl in a JK class whose thing she loves right now is paper or bags. And she just likes playing with bags. And so while there's an element of safety to that, there's also the idea that if I can enter in to your play with these bags, then it gives me the opportunity to make that connection, to tune in, and to help with that co-regulation and to bring us up the ladder. It also allows me to enter your world and to engage so that we can start this or work on this process of kind of what we need to do at school, which is there are some tasks that we don't like to do. But if I can enter into what you love, then maybe we can work together to make the school day work. Sensory-based strategies are bread and butter. Heavy work and movement. So just like I was saying in that mobilization phase, this is one of the key ones, whether you're in a state or recognize that you're in a state of mobilization or not. This really helps our bodies regulate. For the most part, there are some people where that won't be the case, but generally, the idea is when in doubt, heavy work, because heavy work to the joints or that proprioceptive input that Anna was explaining through our senses is really, it bypasses the thinking part of the brain and it releases the endorphins that calm the system down. And so heavy work to the joints and calm rhythmical movement, it can be circular or it can be linear, like a swing, are very regulating to almost everybody's bodies. So it doesn't have to be this like really prescripted, like you need a weighted vest or a weighted blanket. You may have heard of those things, but it can be just as simple as activities in your day. Vacuum with me, garden with me, do laundry with me, put away the groceries with me. Those are all ideas of heavy work. For some, though, it will have to be something scripted, but it can be, let's do an obstacle course together. Let's walk on our hands. Let's crawl. Let's pretend we're turtles and put a beanbag chair on our backs and walk across the floor. Heavy work to the joints, linear movement, smooth rhythmical movement can be very calming. Obviously, we need to take everybody's medical needs into account. For those students who can't get onto the floor and crawl, those weighted blankets are something that can be really beneficial. Massages to the hands, gentle pressure to the joints. All of those things can bring that proprioception in.
Midline crossing. So midline crossing, I'm going to start with what midline is. So midline is this invisible line that goes from the top of your head to your feet and separates the two hemisphere sides of your body. We're born in midline. So when we're inside our mothers, we're forming in midline. Our hands are together, our feet are together. We're in a flex position, and that is a position of safety for an infant. And it's still very much a position of safety for many people. I know when I'm sick, I'm usually in prone. So I'm like usually cuddled in a blanket with my hands together. But midline is a position of safety for human beings. But crossing our midline is really important because it actually helps develop bilateral coordination skills. And it really helps the two sides of our brain cross and communicate. There's a very tiny little bridge from the left side and the right side of our brain called the corpus callosum. You never use your corpus callosum unless you do midline activities. And you never develop a flexible brain unless you keep crossing that bridge quite often. And so that's why we love midline crossing activities. There's so many different ways to do it. It could literally be from reaching across to grab a marker. It can really be from, actually, you can Google things on YouTube that says midline crossing activities for kids. And there's a lot of dancing that involves midline crossing, but incorporating that somehow during your gross motor or outside, even in the park, is a really great way to challenge the brain to get that connection happening. There's oral midline strategies that some of our students really need. It's a part of who they are, and you'll see it in their everyday. So there's some students that will mouth their hands or will put everything in their hands because they're entering a stressful situation. And so sometimes using practical strategies like a chew is very helpful because then they're not looking for something to put in their mouth, and it's something that's safe. Using a thick straw water bottle. We love using that as OTs because you can sip at the same time, and sucking is so calming. And it's also part of your day. You need to drink water anyways, right? And lastly, for some students, maybe even just chewing a piece of gum on your way to school, or asking the teacher if you can use it, or if they're going to sit in the car for a long time, can be really regulating because it's getting that deep pressure in the mouth, but it's also getting midline.
Yeah, just because I'm a total nerd, something that when Anna was talking about the sucking, something that I heard just a couple of weeks ago that like totally like blew my mind, but makes sense, is that suck, swallow, breathe. That's something that we say when we're talking about infants specifically, because that's how they eat. They suck, they swallow, they breathe. And so that breastfeeding piece is also the moment where connection is really occurring. Or feeding actually between the parent and the infant. And so that suck, swallow, breathe is very highly connected to your social system and social engagement. And so it's just kind of so neat how it all comes together, where you're feeding and how you eat, and that all of those early childhood experiences can also affect that social engagement piece as well. And so it was just a really interesting moment. The other thing about midline is that when you learn to cross midline, you have much more flexibility in thinking. Because prior to the age of 3, you don't actually cross midline. And so the two sides of your body are working as very, very independent of each other. When you start to cross midline, you become much more of that whole, and understanding that there is a whole being here. And so when we talk about those terrible 2s, or the 3-year stage, toddler stage, where you need a little bit more co-regulation, the brain is learning to integrate itself and to become one whole. But in that integration comes the ability to be a lot more flexible in how you use your mind. You don't need to be as rigid because you're integrating into one whole. Deep breathing. This is a really big one, actually, and I'm learning more and more that it is a huge regulator for us, and that a lot of us actually don't know how to take a deep breath. And so a deep breath, really what it does is when you are able to take a deep breath all the way down to your diaphragm, and your diaphragm is working properly and engaging on both sides of your body, it then hits that vagus nerve, which is part of that, which is the main nerve in the polyvagal theory. And then it releases the endorphins to calm your system down. So you see here, there's a bunch of kids lying on their backs learning to take deep breaths, because what lying on your back does is it removes gravity. Gravity really makes our muscles work hard. And when we have low tone, or when we're not, when our joints aren't as strong or as developed as they can be, gravity can have a really huge effect on how we take a breath. And so lying on your back will allow your muscles to engage in the way that they should. And then you can learn to take that deep breath in, hold it, and release it. And the in breath is an alerting or activating breath. When you hold it, you allow the vagus nerve to be activated. And then taking a longer time to release it actually tells your nervous system, your ANS, oh, you're fine. Because when we're not fine, our breath is really shallow. But if you can take a longer breath out, it kind of tells your nervous system, oh, wait, you're not in distress, you're okay. Mm-hmm. And it allows the system to calm down. And so activities like being in a choir, learning to play a wind instrument are actually ways of practicing that, of learning how to take that shorter breath in and that deep breath
out. Helping your child identify self-calming strategies and making time for it. A lot of our kids already have really great strategies. And I think all of you here obviously know all of your kids' strategies too. But I think in our busy lives, sometimes we don't make time for those things. And the research shows that if you do make time for those things, you're going to see more regulated kids. And they may not be able to verbally tell you that they love going on the swing at the park, but if that's one of the things that, keeps your child regulated, then making even just 5 minutes every Saturday, or make it consistent so you can have that, they can have that time to feel empowered and to use that strategy. We, as OTs, we also love to identify it. So I think Rhonda and I will say to our kids, wow, Lily, you really love baking. Like baking really calms you down, and you're really creative, and you're really, really happy. So let's make time for that this weekend, because that baking is something that she loves to do, and it is actually very regulating activity. It can be a kitchen disaster, I'm sure, but making that time makes your child feel really important, and once again, feel seen, because that's at the end of the day, they just want to feel seen and accepted, right?
Okay, cognitive strategies.
So we're doing so much waiting now. We're doing so much more waiting now because of COVID. You have to wait outside in your car to get your groceries, or you have to wait in line because of capacity. But waiting and what to do when you're bored, it doesn't come naturally to us. We actually have to learn this pretty explicitly, and we have to learn it from an adult. So we use a lot of co-regulators that are external. So one would be my phone. I use my phone a lot. When I don't want to talk to people in elevators, I pretend to be on it because I'm nervous, and that's more of a social thing. But I'm realizing it's not, for myself, it's not always a great thing to teach my kids, because now they're always looking for my phone and grabbing it when they're bored. But what I recently started using was bringing an I Spy book if we're going to sit in the car a little bit longer, or just crayons or books, any activity that they can do in the car that's not my phone is what I'm challenging myself to do. Because we know that in the research, it shows that watching and being on our screens is actually very dysregulating. Is it for our eyes or a visual field, Rhonda?
I don't know, actually. I think it's our visual field.
I think it's our visual field. Like it's not it doesn't calm our sensory system down. It actually upregulates it quite a bit. And that's why they say usually like you should get off your phone 15 to 30 minutes before you go to bed. because it actually turns your brain on to start thinking a little bit too much. But our kids need that too. And just trying to empower them with things that they can do besides when they're waiting and when they're bored, and teaching that it's okay to be bored. Like being bored is going to be a part of life. And waiting is going to be a part of life too, I think, for our unforeseeable future. So I feel like we're waiting all the time.
We're not a society that's used to waiting, for sure. This is another cognitive strategy. How big is my problem? And I love this one. And my husband and I just use this with our daughter all the time, because it kind of helps you understand, helps me understand as an adult, that not every problem deserves the same level of reaction, or requires, not even just deserves, requires the same level of reaction. So is this a big problem? Are you hurt? Are you bleeding? And if you are, here's some of the strategies or the things that make sense. You can cry, you can talk to mom and dad, you can call for help at that time. Medium, you forgot your homework, fought with a friend, taking a break, talking to a friend, talking to a sibling. Small, something got taken away from me, a toy, I wasn't allowed to eat a cookie. You can take a break, take deep breaths, but really helping to categorize problems can also help model how we react. My husband's very good at this, actually. He will often say, when he's facing something, now, is this a big problem? And he'll model it through his language for our daughter, who is quite anxious, and will model how he is, what kind of a problem he feels it is, and what he can do. And that modeling piece, really, I am learning day by day how powerful that is. Like, a really silly example is my daughter. I just realized, like, last year, she just kept saying, no, I can't run. And she wouldn't run around the playground with her friends. And I was really getting concerned about it, because I'm like, why? Like, I don't know any kids who don't run. Like, why doesn't she run? I was like, I was Miss Vitamin when I was a kid. I was Miss Energy. And then my sister pointed out to me that I always complain when I run about my knees. And I don't run very often because my knees hurt. And I kind of went, it can't be that. But I kind of made this concerted effort in the summer to start running more and just suck up the pain and not complain about it. And now she runs all the time. And I just did not recognize how both my husband and I are old and complain about our knees.
We're not old.
Just how much that that modeling had affected her.
It's so powerful. So powerful. And you can make it really silly too. Like I have a very reactive 5-year-old who like acts like the world is ending when he can't find one shirt. So I'll run upstairs and I'll be like, oh my God, is there a tornado? I thought there was a tornado because of how much you were screaming. Did you need me? And then that helps him refocus, being like, oh, it wasn't really a big deal, Mom. So, and the last bit is we really, by you being here and learning about yourselves and your regulation and your strategies for your students, or for your kids, I'm sorry, is really, at the end of the day, that's really it. Like, this is the heart and basis of what supports good co-regulation and self-regulation skills for their lives. And making sure that you take care of yourself, being aware of your own body and your mind, and really what fills your cup. I like to visualize this cup in my head, and I'm like, oh my God, it's nearing empty, or there's a hole I need to patch in my cup, which is like getting blood work done, or like getting my vitamins or something, or getting a run. But being aware of you is really going to help your child and your family, because that's really what regulation is all about, being aware of ourselves and our children and everyone around our lives that supports us. Rhonda, do you have anything else to add?
No, I think just wanted to let you guys know that these are the resources that we draw on and that we find really helpful. And so hopefully they will be helpful to you as well. And just to say thank you so much for spending this time with us. We really, really appreciate it. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen, so if people wanted to ask some questions. This is
a lot of all those books except Beyond Behaviors is available at the Toronto. I checked the City of Toronto libraries, and they're all not checked out right now. So if you want to check any of them out, they're available. But if you have any questions, Rhonda and I are happy to stay around. You can add it in the chat, or you can take off your audio now. And thank you again for joining us on a Saturday.
Yeah, definitely. Proprioception. Proprioception.
I can type it in.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hi, I have a question.
Sure.
Just wondering about where you would suggest starting. Like my challenge is not meeting the fury with my own fury. You know, if I have a child or even my husband who's losing it over something and trying to find that inner calm in that moment. Do you have any suggestions on how to start, you know, recognizing that and not engaging and not making it worse?
Oh, that's a beautiful question. I will tell you, like it's hard, but that's a good. Honestly, the deep breath for me is really really learning to take a deep breath. It's shocking, and I know it sounds like insanely simple, but really is where it gives me the minute that I need to not go into that kind of threat stage and to bounce back. But it really does take work to like take that deep breath. But now my daughter notices and she's like, oh, you're sighing. So you're why are you taking that deep breath? Because she knows that it's that I'm regulating myself. Okay. But focusing and working on that deep breath for me personally was a big key. Another thing I think Anna does very, very well is trying to just kind of hear behind the words. And that's also a very, very difficult thing, which is that piece of attunement, which I'm not great at, but it's kind of like, okay, I hear that there's this big attack, especially from kids, but what's actually underlying this right here? And then I can find more empathy there for her when she's like screaming at me or hitting me while we're practicing piano or something like that. But I know that she's starving, and she's really grumpy, and so I find more empathy there for her, and don't necessarily react quite as quickly. Okay. I don't know if that's helpful.
I find the meltdown, if it's going too long, I do set a timer. I usually say, I'm going to give you 1 more minute. And then either we move on, or like you get a snack, or you come here and chat with me, or you I give them options. So I give 2 options because it can last a really long time. And my 5-year-old, it used to last 45 minutes, and then we had places to go. Or sometimes we'd be in the car and we're going grocery shopping. So sometimes it's not possible to do a lot of the co-regulation at that point, but it's more giving them the option to snap out of it. And then we do a debrief after, because their brains don't really come into listening and attuning, not for at least like 45 minutes of what happened, right? And then from there, I think that's where I would start. I would actually start after the meltdown happened and just say, dude, what happened? I tried to be there for you, but you didn't really want me because you kept throwing your shoe at me. But what happened? Like, tell me what you were feeling. And I found during the pandemic, I was doing all of that co-regulating, that it was exhausting. I couldn't do it as mom and everybody's co-regulated. I sat my husband down one day and I said, we need a plan, because our 5-year-old was having multiple meltdowns a day and I couldn't manage it anymore. That I was like, we need a plan. So if I give you a signal and it's like, I can't be that person right now, you need to be the person. So you need to go upstairs, take some deep breaths, come back down and sit with him, because I can't right now. I'm full, or my cup's empty today. So making a plan with your spouse or with your friend or whoever the other caregiver is, I think is important. But it's also okay to put boundaries around the meltdowns. But know that those boundaries afterwards, you're going to do a debrief, because that debrief is what helps that connectedness happen. Because then your child will feel heard.
Right.
And I will say, like, even with my husband, like, I often say, I gotta go. and I walk away.
Mm-hmm.
And then I come back for that repair, because we can always come back and repair.
Yes. Yes.
Right.
I read somewhere that it's only 30%. I think Dr. Dan Siegel said out of the 100% of messing up that we do to our kids, we only need to do 30% of repair to have good regulated adults. So I was like, oh, I feel good. It's a really good stat. But yeah.
Sorry, Jane, we keep talking.
No, that's perfect. Thank you.
We have a question.
Yeah.
My 19-year-old son is spending more time on video games. How could I make him more aware that he is spending too much with self-regulation?
Awesome question.
It's a tough one. I think with video games, just like it's just an external co-regulator, right? You're in another world and it feels great because you're kind of not having to face some anxiety or whatever you're trying to get away from. But I think a great one would be just saying, hey, I'm booking a date with you. Can't cancel my date, but I want to do a date where we just spend time together. And you're not allowed to do video games during that date. But during that date, you can show him and talk about what other strategies he can do besides just doing video games, which could be just walking with you for 10 minutes outside, right? Or anything that would help him get his body moving, or helping you to prep in the kitchen. But setting those dates, which obviously I think you need some special interest in there. So throw in whatever he likes to do besides video games, so you can get that relationship piece started.
I think also just what we neglected to say during that co-regulation piece, where we're saying that, like, there's certain times in life where you have to be that co-regulator. It's going to look different at those different times in life as well, right?
Sure.
So for my 3-year-old, I'm going to be much more highly involved, helping them co-regulate. But for my 13 or 14-year-old, or my 19 or 20-year-old, what co-regulation might look like is, I'm here. I know, and the fact that sometimes it's a weird thing, but the fact that you're yelling and screaming at me means that I'm probably a safe person for you. Mm-hmm. And so I have to work on my reactivity. Personally, I'm saying this about myself, because when my daughter's 13, I know it's going to be an interesting season. And be that safe person. That you can come to. But that's a really good idea, because the thing that is missing, and that we are truly learning in through this theory and through this idea, is that it is community, right? And I think the pandemic really highlighted that for a lot of us, and that it's finding that safe connection, right? And so, as Anna said, even if they are playing video games, because teenagers play video games, and actually they find a lot of community in video games, because I don't really understand how that world works, but sometimes there is a lot of community there. But reminding them that you are still that safe person that they can come to, and that's going to look different for different people.
Mm-hmm. I think if you say, get off video games, it's not going to work, because it really doesn't. But I think just saying, there's a lot going on in your life, and whenever you need me, or whenever you need to talk about anything, you just need to know that I'm here, and I'm not going to judge you. We can just talk about it. And that being that throwing that out there is all sometimes our kids need to hear. And I think puberty is a very difficult, and early adult is a very difficult transition, because there's so much you're thinking about. There's so much pressure now, especially as you graduate, to know what you want, what you need to do. So I think it's good to just remind them that you're there for them. I think that's really powerful. But yeah, good point, Rhonda. Like we've lost our sense of communities during COVID, and it's so hard. Like it's so hard.
It is. Anything else?
Thank you for staying 10 minutes later.
Yeah, we really appreciate it.
We
Yeah.
hope you enjoy the rest of the conference, and thank you so much for being here and giving us your time.